taking these figures as rough guides, 15% of the population are dyslexic, 40% of self-made millionaires are dyslexic, 50% of people in prison are dyslexic, 52% of teachers have had no dyslexia training in the UK, and 9 in 10 of those that did said that it was under an hour. 80% of students in the UK that are dyslexic are undiagnosed, and 95% of parents said they felt they lacked the knowledge and resources to support their dyslexic child. £300 to £700 is the cost of a dyslexia assessment.
My name is SIMBLET. I'm an artist and a writer, and I've been working at the University of Oxford for the last 25 years as the tutor in anatomy at the Ruskin School of Art, and then more recently as the tutor for fine art at Christchurch. I've not been formally diagnosed with dyslexia, but I proudly claim that I am, because I recognise that those students I've been working with for years who are struggling with aspects of dyslexia, I just think, well, that's how my brain works, and also those are the same struggles that I had at school. I learned how to spell writing a PhD because it was the first time I was on computer, and so there's this marvellous thing that puts red lines under everything. So I have a game with the red line system. I love it because it rescues me from the embarrassment of people's criticism and judgment about my ability to spell. And I feel very angry about that and cross because I don't have any difficulty with using language. I love language. I've been a storyteller all my life. I'm a creative writer. I enjoy writing. I've published books if it helps people to know that. But sure, I don't put the letters in quite the right order, and who cares, because the machine can sort it out, thankfully. And so I play a game with the red line. You know, how many sentences can I write in this particular document before I get the first red line? There was one book that I did. It was a botanical book, and you're looking at small details of 460 species of plant in order to explain the structure and celebrate the structure, form and diversity of the plant world. And I completely wallpapered my studio, including the door. Immersed in the entirety of what you're working on enables you to see connections that you can't see if you've got it in a pile on your desk. It was a constant thing that I was criticised for being an imaginative person who was sorting out her own thoughts. But I think also that I was criticised endlessly for putting a lot of drawings in my maths book as the answer to the question. I think I retook GCSE maths 5 times before I was allowed to stop retaking it, because finally I got a C and I was allowed to move on in life.
And it was only kind of when I was going through primary school I realised how much further behind I was relative to the kids. And I did have a lot of support when I was in school, so they made it clear that I was of the slower variety. And when it came to doing 11 flush, which was to see who went into the good school and the not so good school, I was rock bottom whenever the test results came out, which was very disheartening because, you know, it's not about being the best, but it's just, you know, sometimes you think maybe you're better than last, but it is what it is. And then so I went into the school, and pretty much I became very content in that was who I was. I was not a high performer. I wasn't really destined to be good at school, but I did tend to be attracted to certain subjects, and I had a natural ability when it came to STEM and art and those kind of various fields, and I quite enjoyed them. But the habit was just built up of just this idea that I wasn't really meant for school, so I didn't put the effort in. And when it came to the GCSE results, again, I remember getting my results and being really heartbroken, because I got 4 GCSEs, got my double award science, my art, my math, and it was 5 to get in. And I thought I would have got the 5 to get in, but I didn't. So it was very much like, okay, that's you done now. You're off to technical college to be an electrician or a plumber. But my partner at the time was also doing she was going into her A levels, and my family and all were like, you know, give it a go. You know, we don't want you going straight into technical college. Well, I'd try at least. So I tried, and thank God they were like, yeah, we'll take you back on the condition that you repeat your English. So I thought, great, I'm back in. This is like another shot. And from then I was like, okay, right, I want to do biology and double award IT. And the vice principal sat me down and was like, okay, like you don't have the subjects to get back in, so you don't really have the choosing power of what you do. You're going to have to go for the subjects that are in lesser demand. But I was lucky that the subjects that were in lesser demand were IT, biology and chemistry. So he threw me into chemistry even though I didn't want to do it. And because I was in the environment that I felt comfortable and liked, I just continued to pursue it and work hard and not let the previous years of failing and probably disheartened get me down. So I just pushed and pushed and pushed, studied, loved what I was studying, and yeah, I came out of my A-levels top of the year. I got an A star in chemistry and A in biology and A in IT, which was something that me, the teachers, my family would have never predicted. And it just so happens that chemistry, the one subject I didn't want to do, was the one I ended up picking to go to university. And the trend continued. I loved my subject. I studied. I worked hard. I got top of the year again in Queen's, and you know the ladder just kept going. And now I'm here studying, working hard at a subject I love, and hopefully I'll be a published author soon. I'm studying synthetic chemistry at Oxford. I've been lost without spell check on the phone. It's I have little, whenever Microsoft Word stops like giving me the red underline under my spellings, I panic. I really do panic. It hasn't picked it up yet. I'm like, oh my god, and then I find it and it's like, okay, turn it on, and next thing, woof, just the sea of red. It's really important to have almost an innate ability to comprehend and break down complex three-dimensional structures, because it is very much a limiting factor with some people, whereas some people it's just natural, it takes no effort at all.
And that you're quite good at the
Yeah, I'm quite good. You'd be surprised, a lot of the time organic chemistry is referred to as chemical architecture. I've never truly got over the ability to present and write in front of people, and I feel like that is something that's been ingrained in me for so many years that I don't know if I'll ever get over it, and I'll always have a bit of anxiety when it comes to doing these things. But that's probably my biggest challenges that I would think of right now, and also it's the speed at which I do things is quite slow, and considering I'm getting into a position where I'm getting more managerial, delegating jobs, writing more, it becomes like it's almost like a heavy weight in my chest that I'm kind of walking into. But it'll be okay. You know, you learn to cope, deal with things, you improve.
Hi everyone, I'm Deshna and I've been studying fine art for the past 3 years at the Ruskin. It's been an amazing journey. Very different from school because I jumped straight into it without foundation. That was a bit scary, and also I was nervous about the reading and the more academic side, and everyone wanted to remind me of that. Like in school, the school teachers used to be like, once I got my offer, they used to say like, oh, are you aware there's actually quite a lot of reading? That used to be like a side comment all the time. Like I just passed someone, a teacher in the corridor, and they'd be like, are you prepared? There's one time where this teacher, after I had like pretty much failed a spelling test, the teacher said, you can't go in for break, if you can't go out to the playground. And she said, you have to stand against the door. And that was, it was like a punishment for not being able to spell. But anyway, so I had to look at all my friends playing on the field, and then there was just me stood against the door, punished because I can't spell. And yeah, that was a key memory. And then onwards from that, I just thought I would never be able to succeed in terms of academics. Yeah, I did have a lot of stick going like with teachers until they realized that I did well in my A levels and my GCSEs. It was almost like they had no belief in me until I got my results each time. It would be whether that be my GCSEs, A levels, or the offers that I got. It was only when they see proof that they thought I was good enough. There was this one teacher, we all were very scared of her, but she said to me, Deshna, she pulled me aside, Deshna, I think you need to take a screening test. I think you need to take a test to see if you're dyslexic. And at that time, I had no idea what was going on. Not a clue. I thought she was just calling me dumb in a different way. Did the test, and kind of a couple of weeks later did a proper test outside of school, and it came out that I was actually quite dyslexic, and it kind of clarified a lot as soon as I did it, and I learned more about it, and people made me feel safe about having this issue. I was a lot more like, there was a lot more ownership of it. Rather than feeling stupid, I felt I can activate my mind in a different way. And it was because of that diagnosis, to be honest. First thing when I found out that I was dyslexic, my mum, not out of being ashamed of me, but she was afraid of the community, was that she was like, don't tell people, like, this is, keep it within the family, like, isn't kind of secretive about it. And so that's one kind of layer to tell me. She didn't want, I know she means the best for me, but that was one thing for me to be like, I'm ashamed of it. I'm meant to be ashamed of being dyslexic. And then I realized, like, slowly I started kind of being like, I don't care if anyone else knows, and found out that my cousin's dyslexic and probably my dad's dyslexic. Yeah, the way we learned in school never worked for me. My mum kind of sat down and like worked me out. Like, she worked out what works for me, and that's through stories and chains of thought. So she'd, if I'm learning dates, it would figuring it out. So in my head, I used to place things together, make a picture or like a scene, and that's how, and I'd memorize everything. Like, it would be so easy once I've got it sorted in my mind in pictures and sequences. The letters are a combination of, just whatever I came into my mind that I liked, but they also have influences of Gujarati, Hindi, and English, because those are the three languages that I've been surrounded by my whole life. It was quite empowering to be able to write a language that no one else can understand, because they've not been given the tools. And it was like my reversal of English, because that's how it's kind of feels with English. Like, it's all code for me. Like, sometimes it's jumbled up. It feels like it's waves sometimes, or swapping and turning. That's sometimes code for me. And it's considered normal for everyone else to be able to read it so easily, but I can't. So it's like the reverse. It's like, have a, like, step in my shoes, kind of. When you see my art, step in my shoes.
One teacher in particular who, when I told her I needed to be in a certain math class to be able to qualify to apply to Yale and Harvard and Princeton and these schools, she just said to me, "You're kidding yourself applying to these schools. Like, you're not in any honors classes and like not doing very well in my class." And I was just like, well, actually, I'm in all honors classes. This is the only class I'm not doing particularly well in. And then, begrudgingly, she let me into the other class. And when I didn't do well on the first paper, she was like, see, an honors calculus class is really no place for someone with dyslexia. And so that just made it very real and very personal. And then once I finally did get into Yale, and I told her about it, she's like, well, we'll see what happens when you get there. And so it was this really like sort of intense animosity to the fact that I wanted access to these spaces where she didn't see me being qualified to participate. Yeah, so that was really difficult. The school recommended that I go for an evaluation, and I had dyslexia, have dyslexia. And, you know, we went in with my parents to a meeting with the principal, who basically said, this is not going to work for Eddie. He needs to leave. And my dad, who religious education was very important to him, said, you know, that's not really an option. We're going to have to make it work. My name's Eddie Meza. I run all of the digital outreach and digital research initiatives for the Oxford Center for the Study of the Bible in Oriel College. I was looking at particularly these mosaics from a synagogue that are in the north of the Galilee region of Israel. When we think about an ancient, mostly illiterate society, the way that people are engaging with the text is probably, the way people are engaging with these stories is probably predominantly through these images as opposed to from the text, because they don't have books in their homes. Even if they did, most of them can't read it, but they are going into the synagogue where they see these images every day, which I think is closely related to what we're talking about here, is the idea that we can look at these ancient visual and material objects with the same amount of rigor and theological import that we ascribe to texts from the same time. When I took the SAT, I had someone said to me, well, of course you did well, you have extended time, you're basically cheating. And so I think, and especially once I got to Oxford, I was told by a lot of people, like, oh, don't tell anyone you have extra time. You keep that to yourself. I was like, but why? Right, so I think the way that accommodations are thought about is often framed as a concession, as opposed to a recognition that sort of a system was developed that wasn't meant to include everyone in an active way.
There can be a perception that it's unfair for some students to have extra time, but there's certainly been research that has showed that even though students do have extra time, so these will be students with some kind of specific learning difference, even though those students do have extra time in their exams, they don't overall perform better than the students who don't have extra time. So the extra time part is levelling the playing field, if you like, but it's certainly not giving any unfair advantage. My name is MARION FROSTICK, and I'm a specialist study skills support tutor at the Disability Advisory Service at Oxford University, and I've been there for about 12 years. The term dyslexia is like an umbrella term which covers all sorts of different kinds of cognitive diversity. Part of our job is to identify which are the strengths. So, for example, we might have a student who is very, very good visually, and that bit of their brain works fantastically well, and their visual memory is really good. So for a student like that, we might use quite a lot of mind maps, diagrams, those kinds of techniques to support their study. And then there are other dyslexic students who are not at all strong visually, but are really good auditorily. So for them, it might be that their most effective way to study is to focus on talking, speaking out loud. So again, we would work with them on strategies that support all of that auditory processing part of their brain. Subject-wise is really interesting. Yes, I think I've worked with students from almost every subject. Lots study English, which is not what you might think for somebody who's dyslexic, and yet these students have got amazing imaginations, and they're creative, and they make links in a way that other people wouldn't have thought, and they have insight and just a different angle on things. Yes, musicians. I'm interested in the dyslexic musicians, so I think they have often very strong auditory processing skills and auditory memory. We see lawyers, we see every kind of scientist. Yes, it doesn't tie up to a subject.
My name is Sarah Middleton. I'd consider myself a plant ecologist, I'm in the middle of doing my DPhil here at Oxford University. I'm basically looking at the effect of drought on a chalk grassland, which is in Whiteham Woods, which is not too far from like where we are today. School I was kind of like slow, sometimes labelled as a bit lazy, kind of like, oh, you try hard but like you're not kind of getting the results kind of thing. And then it was only until I think it was like second or third, maybe second year of my undergraduate degree that I found out I was dyslexic. I was like, oh, that explains so much. Why I struggle with spelling and slow at reading and the words like jumble around and all that kind of stuff. Like all these things couldn't be explained just from dyslexia. I was like, there's other things that have like these sensitivities and things. I mean, there is quite a lot of overlap as well, which is like why this like umbrella term of like neurodiversity has kind of been quite popular. Because there's a lot of overlap, like if you think loads of like Venn diagrams and things. But a lot of the other traits were like more autistic as well. Generally for women you get diagnosed later because you're very good at masking, and I didn't realise I was doing that very, very heavily at a detriment to my like mental health. And then like now I'm starting to sort of like unmask more, so like I will stim, so like moving. That's why I move so much as well. Just to like sort of like self-soothing, that's very hard to say. And I'm just like accepting it and just like it's not like a dirty word kind of thing, which often is like kind of in the media. I'm just like, no, this is me. I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of the way that I think differently, and I just hope like people will accept me. I know some won't, but I'm just gonna be me. And then for my A-levels, I basically almost failed I failed pretty much one of my exams, and that brought my whole grade down. And then you need a certain amount of like UCAS points to get into university, and mine were like kind of on the lower end. So I took like a year out and then worked and then applied and tried to find universities that would accept my lower grades. And then I finally found one, so I went to Oxford Brookes and did environmental science, and that was really good for me, that course. And then after being diagnosed, I realised like, no, I wasn't stupid or like lazy, it was just I learnt in a different way, and I just needed to adapt the way I learned. I love like detail, and I will like be drawn to like little patterns, or even like in the bark, for example, or like make structures and things from things I see. But then I'll also like scroll up and see like the bigger picture and then how those kind of relate and the networks between them. And so my brain is kind of like a map, and kind of bringing different things together and seeing them in detail and then seeing how they relate to like the bigger picture and stuff. Yeah, we need everyone on board for like the huge challenges like climate change, trying to solve, conflicts and things. We just need as many minds, on board. And it's sad that you're just shutting us out without giving us a chance, I think.
I mean, my daughter is very dyslexic. I spent an entire life with below targets. And what does that do to you? The pace of national curriculum regarding teaching phonics and literacy is tremendous. GCSE now, you've got a lot of A-level work that's trickled into it. Degree work has trickled into A-level. I have no idea at degree level what's going on now, because when I look at what's expected, I think even for the normal, we would say in the world of dyslexia, the normal developing reader, speller, it's still tremendously difficult and too much pressure. And a lot of children that aren't struggling with literacy are still suffering from terrible stress and anxiety. So those children that do have dyslexia or literacy difficulty, it's compounded. Your results are so public somehow. Teachers are under terrible pressure to deliver the national curriculum at the right speed, to get results, show there's progress. But what's actually not happening is developing just rounded young people and developing their actual understanding of one another and how each other's work. And I learn this way, you learn that way. I struggle with that, but I'm much better at that. And just that general respect of being different people. It's like, no, there's a very tight, narrow little area, and you've got to fall into that. So the self-esteem is very easily chipped away right from the outset. If homework's becoming an awful issue at home, we'll say stop. Don't have to do it, because what's more important is the child who's exhausted from focusing so hard at school, being unhappy at home too. Just rest, take the time, refresh yourself, come back tomorrow. And you certainly don't want that terrible thing that can happen between parents and their children over homework, because that really, really can cause tremendous upset.
After the first day of his assessment, he came home and Mum was keen to find out, what he thought of the school, and she asked him, "Oh, how did it go? What was it like? What was the school like?" And he came out with, he said, "Mum, I felt normal." Now, that's such a simple thing to say, but with such huge ramifications as to how he perceived himself. Mum just burst into tears straight away because she suddenly realised what effect it was having on him.
So I think for me it's about that unpicks some of that anxiety around confidence because I think the pressure that those pressures kind of exacerbate the anxiety. So I think for me, actually being dyslexic, it's okay to let myself have time to kind of formulate something and respond. Okay, hi, my name's Graham Hughes. I'm an artist and I teach printmaking at the Ruskin School of Art. Yeah, my great-grandfather was a brickmaker. My mum's grandfather was a brickmaker. They were a brickmaking family. But then my grandfather was an artist, but he was very, very non-verbal. I don't know if he could write, actually. So I wonder whether he was dyslexic, because he didn't really write at all, but he made stuff. And so he was a big influence in my life of making things. I used to make things with him. So that was a really good space of kind of, I think that was foundational, actually. I've still got the objects that I first made, so.
What were they?
It's a gypsy wagon out of matchsticks. So I think I made that when I was 4 with it. So I used to clean his matchsticks. So he'd smoke like a trooper, and I'd clean his matchsticks. So unhealthy. So, and then we made these amazing models. He made these like cathedrals, like beautiful churches out of matchsticks.
I'm John Stein. I'm a retired teacher from Magdalen College, Oxford. I used to teach medical students. At the moment, my main job, dyslexia-wise, is running a thing called the Dyslexia Research Track. It was probably about 1980, actually. The then Vice-Chancellor said, well, there's no possibility that anybody with dyslexia could be at Oxford. They couldn't get here. I was extremely angry about that, and so I wrote some quite rude letters, which in the end got dyslexia accepted as something that does happen in some students in Oxford. The people who are middle class get the diagnosis because they can pay for it and therefore get an unfair share of resources. And I think that is just scandalous. If you have, for whatever reason, and mainly it's genetic, a weakness in the development of your magna cells, that means your parvus cells are going to be more successful in making connections because the absent magna cells leave room for the parvus cells to do better, as it were. And that explains, I think, why many dyslexics, not all, have remarkable talents. It's because the parvus cells are better interconnected. Things that the parvus cells are good at, which is things like fine detail and colour and patterns, are enhanced. What I've tried to emphasise is that dyslexics make up for their weakness at sequential temporal processing by having fantastic holistic abilities. It extends to abstract situations where, for instance, we were talking about reading people. They can put together all the aspects of somebody that they know in such a way as to extract what you might call the true person and therefore empathize with them more. Seeing 3D structures from a two-dimensional drawing is one of the features that make dyslexics stand out. But it's not true of all dyslexics. This timing system is mediated by a set of nerve cells in the brain called magna cells, and they happen to be most sensitive to yellow light. Although they don't support colour vision, they're nevertheless best activated by yellow light. And the whole system of timing within the brain is actually also facilitated by blue light. So we've been using blue or yellow filters, and we find that the vast majority with visual problems for reading are helped by either blue or yellow filters. And those blue or yellow filters are very cheap. And so we found that we can help a lot of children.
Blue glasses, so these make it easier for me to do the reading, so the words move around a lot less. My name is Richard Orban, and I'm a licensing and ventures manager within Oxford University Innovation. So my job is to help the university to ensure that its research and technology can deliver impact. I think we're now set up around 250 companies, but I typically work on around 100 projects at a time. But I've got an atrocious sense of direction, so much so in fact it used to be a game. When I used to work in Edinburgh, I had my co-workers would put me in Edinburgh, tell me to point at a famous place, and I got it wrong every single time. You get the month and a day mixed up, and then suddenly it's like, hang on, why is there nobody else here? But apart from that slight embarrassment, you just kind of tell people, I messed up here because of this reason, I'm really sorry. I would learn the mind map instead of rereading the notes and instead of rereading the textbooks, because by going through the mind map, it meant that I had a pictorial representation of what I needed to understand. And it also provided means which I can get down to root cause of why. Because I was doing the mind maps and because of the way my mind works, I think, I was able to join stuff together across different subjects, which I don't think others necessarily did. Rather than being what adjustment do we need to make it easier for you, it could be, well, what can we learn for you to make it easier for everybody?
The disability mantra, like access for one, access for all, you make those adjustments. Sure, there can be a conflict, but generally speaking, if you make something more accessible for a neurodivergent person, you're actually making it more accessible for everyone. So I am a visual criminologist, which means I'm a criminologist that focuses on the visual, so seeing, picturing, and visual culture more broadly, so how seeing and picturing is kind of distributed through networks and society and so on. So I got my psychiatric diagnosis for dyslexia, and I make those distinctions between the psychiatric diagnosis and the kind of self-diagnosis, because I think self-diagnosis is valid, considering how difficult psychiatric diagnosis can be to obtain for many political reasons especially. I got my psychiatric diagnosis for dyslexia when I was 21. I'd had a difficult time at university during undergraduate because of the deferrals, and I just felt like a failure because I thought, this is why I can't continue. I might get a bit teary, but I don't mind getting teary. I'm all about owning it. This is why I can't continue, and this is why I'll never graduate, because I'm dyslexic. And I, in a disablest way, thought that dyslexia was synonymous with not being particularly intelligent, which is just, I mourn for that person not knowing what dyslexia was then, and I mourn therefore for neurotypical society because they also tend to think in those terms, my experience shows. So I was really upset, but I went to speak with that teacher afterwards, and he kind of said, you can get extensions, you can get all these things. And once I got my extensions and I got my supports in place, I went from scraping passes in first and second year to graduating almost at the top of the degree group. So I was hitting 86%, 76%, like really high marks. And that changed my life, because I realised that support, when things are kind of tailored for you and things attend to your one specific needs, the flourishing that can take place is kind of unstoppable. And then I graduated highly and came to Oxford to do my fully funded master's and PhD, so I thought, well, I've made it now, it's fine. But then the meltdown started to continue to happen, not in the master's, that was fine, because it was a taught programme, and again, the adjustments were in place. But when you go on to do a doctorate, there remains a gulf in terms of support for neurodivergent especially dyslexic, maybe not especially, I think neurodivergent more generally, all of us, there is an absolute dearth of support. There is no support. It makes me so angry how so much support and provision is provided for the undergraduate. Not angry towards that, but how could there be this kind of this blind spot when it comes to postgraduate research? Like, how can we not see that a neurodivergent student is not going to complete in 3 years? If I get a third more time on my undergraduate examination and a 3-hour exam that makes 4 hours, why don't I get 4 years instead of 3? You know, why do I have to pay thousands of pounds when I don't hit that 3-year benchmark? Why do my supervisors not understand what dyslexia is? Why have they never supervised a dyslexic student? And ultimately, I think, because of being autistic, and an unsupported autistic, or autist, I prefer to say, that made my experience as a doctoral student difficult because the structures didn't know how to support me, including my supervisors. And I think the thing to emphasise, especially for the record, is that, you know, when I kind of critique the supervision, I'm critiquing it at a structural level. I'm not kind of placing any blame on individuals. It's a structural issue. To describe and analyse an idea in a vacuum, it makes no sense to me neurologically. I have to have that breadth. And that was what made the doctorate really quite difficult for me, because the breadth was so unwieldy. And one of the key things for any dissertation, of course, I know this from the start, you know, but it's impossible for me, is to narrow. And when asking a dyslexic person to narrow something as a starting point is inherently exclusionary, because it's not the way our minds work. We're such holistic thinkers. We're not sure we can, and then we also, like for me, I also, maybe because of my autism, I like depth, but it means I've got to get the depth out of every idea. So then I'm just like, you know, like, I really relate with that. And, you know, reading, so a book, chapter, and article generally in arts and humanities and social science, particular kinds of social science, tends to be about 20 pages. And when I was an undergraduate, reading 20 pages would take me a day. So it would take me the 6 to 8 hours to read one article or one chapter. And one of the things, you know, teaching now is that I resent that, you know, there's information here to be accessed, but this medium is a problem. So, you know, my colleagues up at Brookes, particularly me, I think, I really try and look at alternative formats.
And that's the argument really for making the environment more inclusive and anticipating people's needs, because there will be so many people that never come anywhere near us, but that do have an underlying SBLD profile who would benefit from adjustments and support. And if those are just built in as standard from the start, then you don't need to put people through the process and potentially the associated stress of, hopefully, you know, once you get to meet us, we're not, you know, we're going to make it as minimally stressful as possible. But it takes time to register with us, to provide evidence, or to obtain it if you don't have it, to go through an assessment. You talk to people who've talked about that as being, you know, a feeling like a kind of a bit of a trauma at times, because and that was certainly what I found when I did my psychology dissertation, was that, yeah, it's kind of surfacing all these sort of deep insecurities that people have often lived with actually throughout their life, because they've not kind of quite understood why they've just found these things more difficult than many other people who it seems to come much more naturally and easily. I'm Kathy Noren Curtis, and I'm head of the Disability Advisory Service and all that entails. I've been working at Oxford for 10 years now, and I've got a background in mental health, working as a mental health advisor at another university, and as a primary care mental health worker in the NHS before that. I have in the region of about 4,800 students registered with us, which is, I'd guess, around 19% of the student population. So that's shot up from last year. There is some research literature around sort of self-esteem and SBLD, and I think that's really interesting. So as an institution, I would like to see us not kind of to removing some of these barriers and just accepting that there will be large numbers of neurodiverse students who require adjustments. Why make them register with the DAS? And kind of in line with Kate's view, my utopian future would be that our service doesn't exist, because you would hardly ever need to consult us or come to us because what you need is already there. But it's been interesting with COVID how quickly issues like lecture capture have moved on, and we know that that's a really hot topic with students who are understandably quite cross that there has always been so much resistance to recording lectures at Oxford, and then all of a sudden we're in a pandemic and it's possible overnight. And I understand that that's a difficult thing to swallow, but I think it will provide us with opportunities to really get that debate going again and try to ensure that some of these changes become much more long term, so that people have the opportunity to engage with their study in the way that suits them without having to necessarily ask for individual arrangements. So we've had to shift to online suddenly, but it's still a timed assessment that will always disadvantage students with specific learning difficulties, regardless of what adjustments we make for them. And there's some research coming out of Cambridge University that seems to be confirming that that's the case, that it doesn't matter whether you give extra time or a computer, it will help, but it won't level the playing field for students with specific learning difficulties. But if you give them a take-home paper with longer to work on it, then the gap kind of is much smaller, if not, existent at all.
Hi, so I'm James Shepherd. I'm a lecturer at the University of Oxford. I work in the Department of Primary Care, and I do research into how GPs care for older people, particularly how they look after people who've got high blood pressure and might be at risk of having heart attacks and strokes. Thinking about what my day-to-day job is, writing and reading, is pretty critical, and so it's not something I would have expected to end up doing when I was a kid. I never dreamt of being a university lecturer. But I'd say these days, like I say, I don't feel like it holds me back. Funnily enough, I mean, I suppose my job involves reading lots, but only reading to myself, so I don't really notice it there. The only time I ever really notice difficulties with reading, ironically, is when I'm reading stories to my kids at bedtime. And that can be a bit embarrassing, in that my kids are aged 5 and 3, so we're not talking about complicated books, but even the simple stuff I sometimes get tripped over. And unfortunately, my daughter in particular, she's very clever, and she quite often corrects me. And sometimes it's just because she's memorized the book, she's heard it so many times. But now she's starting to learn to read and write. Sometimes she literally corrects, reads the book next to me, and then points out when I've got it wrong. And I do find that hard sometimes, particularly if I've had a long day at work and I'm really tired. It can be quite annoying, and it is embarrassing, because I mean, these books are really easy to read. I mean, they're designed to be easy to read. That's why they're kids' books. But I do notice it, and I do find it quite tiring. Like I say, after a long week at work or whatever, there are certain kids' books that I wouldn't want to read at bedtime, because it's just, I haven't got the energy to do it. So it does. So it obviously does affect me in that sense. But it's only when you've got a 5-year-old correcting you that you become acutely aware of it.
Smart is not just ticks and crosses. Smart is building boats from boxes, painting patterns, wheeling wagons, being mermaids, riding dragons. Like that thing of, when you think you're going to be asked to read out loud. And that I could read out loud, but I wouldn't have a clue what I'd read. So I'd be so focused, and I noticed that when I read to my son, actually, bedtime stories. He'll then ask me a question about the story, and I don't have a clue, because I don't, I'll have to then go over and reread it. I'm Alda, and I'm a specialist mentor for the Disability Advisory Service. I can remember, and I can remember actually having a spelling book, I can remember the colour of it now. Is it like orange, little book. I can't work out what age I was, but and I think the teacher was irritated with quite a few of us in the class. But I'd spelt, I don't know why I'm smiling, but I'd spelt spelling wrong, and she flung it at me, you can't even spell spelling right. I mean, that's awful, isn't it, really? Like, to lob a book at someone. But again, it's like, you know, all these missed opportunities. It's sort of, yeah, it makes me mad, really, when I think about it now. There's always this message of, if only you could focus or pay attention, or, you know, you could be like, you could do really well. And it's like, well, actually, I think I'm doing all right. But it's a feeling. I mean, I often used to think of it as like, I would, you know, if I did write something for school and then I would like hand it in and I'd be really excited about it and often think like someone's going to like think this is great, and then you just get it back and all they've done is like pick apart, you know, the grammar or the lack of spacing or punctuation or whatever. But it's that feeling of like, oh, you know, like got all these ideas and someone's just kind of like taken a hose pipe out on it, and it's sort of, yeah, really disheartening. But I mean, I didn't get a diagnosis. I mean, I always find that word funny, but anyway, I wasn't identified as having dyslexia and dyspraxia till I was at uni, and I was like 24 because I went a lot later. It was like, hallelujah, you know, like it's not, I don't know, it just made sense. Yeah, it made perfect sense. I sometimes think of it in terms of like having different tabs going, like there's always like, and there's always probably like 2 or 3 other tabs like running at the same time. I don't know, I just did like loads of kind of work with people. So again, it was all the roles were very much dependent on where my strengths were. And it was about kind of making connections in community, getting people set up in kind of into, you know, opportunities to like engage in positive activities they liked in the community. It was all that kind of stuff, and I really enjoyed it. I think it was the first year that the social work degree came out, and I managed to get into, I applied to quite a few, but I only got interviews for 2, and Portsmouth was one of them. And the tutor there I think she just saw that I'd had lots of work experience and I was enthusiastic and passionate, and she was very much like that. And I don't think she'd come about education in a kind of traditional sense. So I think, to be honest, I think I probably got in the last year that you could without having all these other things that you probably had to have. So in a way, I often sometimes feel like I got in the back door a little bit. Based on my interview, I say, oh, I'm dyslexic. That what is people's understanding of that? That it's just like, oh, you can't spell or something. You know, I don't know that people kind of get that. Because I suppose I can't articulate what that means. Like if someone say, oh, you know, so what is dyslexia? I think I'd probably struggle in saying.
And I think before now I've really kept it to myself and only told people when I really trust them, and they're quite shocked and they say, you sure you've got dyslexia? Because I think they think that I obviously wouldn't have the job I do if I was dyslexic. So yeah, they're very surprised, and it always surprises me because then I think, oh, well, what do you think? But I don't really go there. At the moment, I'm a leasehold management officer, and I've just been successful in getting the senior tenancy management post, which I hope to be starting at the beginning of next year. Yeah, it was really difficult, and I think because I knew I was far behind, then I felt like I couldn't do it and I wouldn't be able to do it. And not having that confidence to try, I think really affected me, because I just thought, well, what's the point? I'm not going to succeed anyway. My manager agreed to pay for me to do my level 3, which I think's equivalent to GCSE level. So that totally terrified me, and I was like, oh no, I can't do that. I can't do that bit. And she was like, no, you can do it. You'll be really good. It'll be fine. We'll help you. And a couple of my other colleagues did it with me. And not going to lie, I did get a refer that at that point I said, oh, I've got to fail. It's all over. I can't do it. And I sat with my mentor. We went through it all. And then I put it back in again and I managed to pass. And then I thought, you know what, and it was just amazing actually passing that and thinking, my God, I did it, I can do it.
My job title is Head of Cultural Programming and Partnerships, and what that means is I look after Torch, which is the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities, and that supports interdisciplinary research. As a child, which always come to me each day, Victoria, you're such a scatterbrain. Victoria, you're such a grasshopper. Victoria, you never stick to just one thing. And it was always put as a very negative thing to me. And it wasn't until later on in life, in fact, the last year of my first degree, so at the age of 21, where I was had an assessment and diagnosed as dyslexic, and I'm sure there's other things going on as well. Humans are complicated creatures, but I realised actually that was my coping mechanism. When I found I would hit barriers, I would move sideways and start something else. But I have an ability to multitask, so the limitations that come with dyslexia, I would just try and naturally bypass. So she said, well, no, you can have an assessment. Well, that's the first time I'd heard of an assessment. And she said, oh, it costs £350. I was like, well, I'm not having that then. And then she said, oh, no, well, you might be able to ask for a grant for it. And I had 3 jobs to pay for my studies. So I was like, I literally can't afford to, you know, pay for this. So I went to check. And they'd given out all their money that year. So I was like, oh, well, I guess I won't have it. It doesn't matter. And I was thinking, well, you know, I've got 11 GCSEs, 3 A levels. So you can't be doing that badly. You know, and I was thinking I'll probably have it done. You know, I won't have it. And then the 350 quid, that'll take me a month to earn that. So, but then they very kindly came back and said, look, why don't you pay for it yourself, and we'll really try and find you the money. So I was like, I was kind of 50-50, like I might get the money back. So I almost didn't have it at all because of the financial reasons. And then I thought, well, it's now or never really. And there was a really good educational psychologist who was recommended. And yeah, I got lost on the way to her house. And I was ringing the doorbell. I was like, you're not here. Where are you? And she was like, I'm literally standing at my door. I was like, I'm not here. I went and looked at the street sign. I was like, I'm on the wrong street. Like, went round to her. She put it in the report. Like, I was like, oh, harsh. But also relevant. I hadn't had any help in my first primary school, and I'd been left. You know, every time I went to the teacher, I don't understand. I can't read this. I don't know how to write this. She'd give me colouring in. So, you know, at 8, I couldn't do very much at all. I never read for pleasure. My parents read to me. My parents are, you know, fantastic. But, you know, if I'd stayed in that school, I wouldn't be where I am now.
So, like, school was a weird experience. And it was an amazing experience for, like, so many different ways. And I learned so much, but it also just wasn't the right environment for me. And when I learned that was really scary too. I was at primary school, because I went to my, like, 2 local state schools. In primary school, I was part of that slightly special group, because I feel like primary school you're very much focused on there's one way of learning, and there was a really easy way to regulate if a child was clever or not clever, and that sort of things like telling the time, or knowing the month of the year, or spelling, or things like I always really struggled. Do you write right to left, or do you write left to right? I always used to struggle. So even in year 6, when I did my SATs exam, I think I did one paper and I wrote the wrong way. And then when I was 14, I got really, really bad mental depression, mental health. And that came out in loads of different things like depression and anxiety. And I couldn't go to school anymore. I couldn't really get out of bed anymore for a long time. And like I was talking about at the beginning, something about doughs, it's so tactile. And for a long time, my parents are amazing, and they were just trying to distract me from like wanting to go back to bed, or like just distract me from my mind and anxieties. So they tried to get me into things like knitting, which I also, maybe I'm slightly ADHD, I don't know, but I have really, really short attention span. So I could not knit for my life, because I'd knit for like a minute and then I'd be like, okay, I'm bored. Or like I'd do something like, they also tried to get me into gardening. So I'd do that for a minute and I'd be like, I'm bored, I'm done with these plants. And then one day I just watched my dad make a loaf of bread, and it wasn't amazing. It wasn't like a sourdough baker, it was kind of like this big, dense, bruised block of a loaf. And he was quite like slapping forward, and there was mess going everywhere. But I loved that. And I watched him do that, and I like kind of forced him to teach me. And then once I did, like, the thing about bread is it's a process. It takes 24 hours to make. So I knew that I had to be there in the morning to put the bread in the oven. And I had to get out of bed, and I had to keep breathing and keep living and keep doing. And that really, really helped me. And then I started making like 2 loaves a day, 3 loaves a day, and I have quite obsessive behaviour. So I started making like 5 loaves a day. And by this point, like, our pure bread diet had just hit a plateau. We just couldn't do anymore. So I started delivering it to different neighbours' houses, and those neighbours would then like tell their friends about it, and those friends would tell their neighbours. 6 months from when I baked my first loaf, we opened the shop, and then we've been doing that for a year now.
When you were working as a dyslexia advisor, did you see sort of repeated challenges or strengths within the students that you were seeing?
I think the common challenges were the fact that time was the biggest single issue. How to manage time, how to conceive of time, how to parcel time, how to plan ahead with time. It was looking at what their skill set already was, and then trying to sort of just recalibrate it just a little bit. So they were in control.
But like, yeah, when it came to like the actual A-levels exams, obviously you've got that extra like added like pressure, like, oh damn, like this is for real now. But then at the same time, I think like I had like one of the years where the papers were like that little bit longer, which like for most people probably didn't make that much of a difference, but it did for me. So like, again, because I was sometimes just struggling to finish papers full stop, it meant like I was never ever like double checking my work because I just wouldn't have the time. So I had to kind of just get it right first time, or like that was it. But yeah, I didn't actually finish my biology and chemistry papers for A levels for the ones that counted. Just ran out of time at the end. But all's well that ends well, I guess. Yeah, so hi, I'm Leslie Dixon-Teta. My current role, I currently work within tech, the product department at SARA, which is sort of a mix between social care and a tech startup. And I studied medicine. It was actually like, I think the school kind of gave up on teaching me to read and stuff. It was actually like a lot of input from my grandmother, which got me there. We used to go to like the listening library and stuff. She used to help me read the books at night and things. But yeah, I think like people kind of just, so I think that the school let my family know that there was like something wrong. I think my family kind of knew there was something wrong, but everybody assumed I was just like slow and stupid, and like that was sort of like okay, I guess. But then after that point in South Africa, oh no, sorry, let me just back up a little bit. I think like the thing is, when I was able to read, I think that was like a game changer academically, because basically with my dyslexia, it's very much like auditory. And I think it's like auditory working memories. I remember being like lectures at uni and stuff where I have to be like trying to look at what the people next to me had written and stuff. And like I was just like out the game completely. And I think it was like very much the same thing before being able to read, because obviously because I'm so weak in terms of like the auditory sense, if I can't read, I've just got no other recourse or option. I have this thing sometimes where it's like, I'm looking at the page and the words are there. Like sometimes they're moving around a little bit, but like they're there. I think like the biggest thing is I'm like able to read you the word, but the words contain no meaning though. So it's like I have to just reread the paragraph, reread the paragraph. And it's like, it's not like I'm reading words. It's like it's almost like looking at a symbol that holds no weight. And then it's like maybe I'll look away from the page and I'll look back again, or like I'll pause or something. And like I'm snapped back in, and then the words have meaning again. When somebody's like speaking to me in like a lecture sense, like it's all right if we're having, I don't know like what the difference is, but it's all right if we're having a conversation about something. I can like learn that way and like stay tuned in. But if it's like a lecture where somebody's just like speaking at me, I do this thing where I just like blank out. And like again, it's similar to the reading thing I was saying, where it's like the words are just symbols. I can hear them saying stuff, but it's just sound. That carries absolutely no meaning. So I'm literally just there with my own thoughts. Like more than I probably sort of said at the time or admitted, I think it was actually like a massive weight off my shoulders in a lot of senses, having that official diagnosis. I think it can be like a big weight off your shoulders. I think it's what they say sometimes about sort of like the worst thing is not knowing, and then like once you do know, you're like, yeah.
Hi, I'm Olivia, and I have been behind the camera on this project, and it really started because I was getting really great support at university from my two dyslexia advisors, MARION and Alex, who have both been part of this project. And at the same time, at the weekends, I was on the phone to a younger sibling who was really, really struggling at school and not finding support, really. And I just didn't it didn't make sense. Why did I have access to support at university, and why did they not have access at primary and secondary school? Before wrapping on the kind of editing the conversations down, I wrote a list of everybody's names and was like, oh, hang on a second, this is everybody that identified as dyslexia had an adverse experience at school where you'd go, oh wow, that's an exceptional, I can't believe that happened to you, I'm so sorry. And then you go, no, hang on, this is the pattern. It's not the exception, this is the rule. Every single, so if you are neurodivergent or dyslexic and you get through school without having an adverse experience where you are made to feel ashamed or punished or excluded, you're lucky. And that really shouldn't be the case. I mean, a lot of the speakers talked about moving schools and how that was game-changing for them. I moved country, but before I moved to Spain, I was in France in a state school where I had a teacher for 2 years who ripped pages out of my books and would just, because of the number of spelling mistakes, would just write insufficient on the remaining blank page. But yeah, I've got friends who are doing teacher training courses at the moment who just like, we're not covering neurodiversity. In the UK, okay, so you've maybe got departments in schools that are special educational needs departments, but if 80% of kids that are dyslexic in the UK are undiagnosed, they are not going to make their way to those spaces of support. And also that's really dependent on the individual schools' resources and all of that, but also the places where those children spend the most time is in teachers' classrooms. And if those teachers do not understand that people are going to be learning from a different place, they are not properly equipped to nurture all children. I mean, they are, because teachers are amazing and resilient and find ways of doing things and engaging kids. But there's a problem with the fact that all of those speakers had stories of not being included in an educational environment. And it was really interesting because all of them, even at a much later stage, was like, whoa, this was so important for me to understand how I was moving through this world in a different way. In terms of the way I was doing things differently, it helped me understand the challenges and come up with strategies. So it's everybody talked about it in the light of it being a really empowering thing that helped them strategize and help them work on the challenges, but also play to their strengths.
It's my first like proper full-on conversation with a fellow dyslexic, and I think I thought my type of dyslexia was pretty rare. Because I think again, the common people think of is just the spelling and stuff like that. So it's been really interesting to actually hear how similar your type of dyslexia is to mine. But yeah,
I think the diagnostic labels tend to make things a little bit exclusive. And I think we'll begin to realise, I do think we're heading into a really challenging but really exciting future of work and living and thinking on all sorts of levels. We were before the pandemic, we are even more so now. And I think the way of thinking, when you think a bit differently, will really, really count.
It's big belief. It's business is not for profit. Business is for social and environmental change and influence. And I really love that idea, and that's what I want to get into business for, so I can change the environment and social and communities, not for profit, because that's so not what it's about anymore.
I think we can label things dyslexia, and you look at the autism spectrum. We need all of these people because they are different ways of doing, and you need different people to make up a brilliant society, right?
It's just knowing that, okay, it might be a little bit difficult, it might take a little bit longer, but you'll get there, and whatever you want to achieve, give it a go,
Google Maps, the way you can walk down the street, and I love all that sort of stuff, and I think that's the bit that perhaps will be more helpful going forward, that maybe there were the things that I didn't have when I was younger that I would definitely kind of say are all sort of positives with sort of technology and stuff.
I would say that one of my strengths is being able to kind of look at those from a broader perspective and see how different projects might fit together and look at the bigger picture of what we're actually trying to achieve.
The future has got to be a much more inclusive environment. We've got to really seize the opportunities that we've been given by the pandemic to reconsider how we deliver teaching, how we provide our services, how we expect students to engage with their courses. And hopefully try to harness some of the positive stuff that's come out of it and some of the learning that we've all been able to do.
To your earlier question, how do I feel about being dyslexic now? I love being dyslexic. I just think it's, even if because I was late diagnosed, if I pull that through my childhood, you know, one of the things that was celebrated by, I suppose, like educators in my family and my own learning experience was how kind of left field or off the wall my kind of thinking and creative practice always was as a child, you know, all the way through.
There's any child out there watching this and they're having difficulties at school, they're finding it difficult to spell, or if they get a blank piece of paper, they don't know how to fill that piece of paper when they're asked to write an essay or do some writing. Don't worry, it's fine. It gets easier as you get older. And as you get older and move through the education system, you'll become decreasingly dependent on a pen and paper and possibly more dependent on a computer with a spell checker. So it's going to be okay. Don't worry.
Some people think that dyslexics become entrepreneurs or artists or whatever simply because they don't have to do so much reading. Now, I think that's not the case. I think it's because they have inherent talents that make them better at those things. And I think the evidence is now beginning to pile in. But you have to know what you're looking for.
That visual image becomes a kind of, not a solution, it becomes a visual of all those ideas. And I kind of see it in my head.
Like autism spectrum disorder, I don't really like the term disordered. My brain is not disordered, it's just wired differently. And it's just like very sort of negative rather than... What I'd really love is that like we just create a more accommodating culture within like academia, science and generally in society, celebrate like our neurodiversities, use those strengths and kind of be more accepting and accommodating of some of our weaknesses. So that would be my dream.
It's a good time to be dyslexic, as Andrew said, and but it's just, how do we make sure that's available to all?
What is nice is I'm starting to meet students a little bit more who are just really proud of being dyslexic. Yeah. They say, hey, you know, I've got this amazing brain.
And recognizing that there's more than just reading information out of a book and then writing it down on an exam.
When you tell someone else, you're kind of letting it off your own shoulders. You're just like letting go of it and you're getting prouder and prouder of who you are each step.
I'm glad I am the way I am. I'm glad that the thing that was holding me back at the start is the thing that has pushed me over the finish line.
We need to look at and articulate and celebrate the strengths of having this way of thinking and stop the negative language, because it's a terrible mantle to be putting on people's shoulders, and it then just teaches them that they should be thinking about it negatively when they really shouldn't. It's a great strength. I'm immensely proud of the kind of brain that I have got, and I wouldn't swap it. And I'll shout from the rooftops that I'm dyslexic.
If you would like to listen to any of these speakers in more detail and tune into their stories, you can find their extended conversations on the Torch website.